Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be talking about vulnerability today,
Oh, yeah.
which, is something that a lot of people are really interested in these days.
Yeah.
How to live a more authentic and wholehearted life.
Right.
And we're going to be taking a deep dive into Brené Brown's book, Daring Greatly.
My book.
It's a fantastic book.
Right.
It's chock full of, wisdom and insights.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, she didn't really start out
Yeah.
wanting to study vulnerability. In
Uh-huh.
fact, she spent a lot of her life trying to avoid it.
Yeah, she did. She really did.
She had that whole kind of
Yeah.
Texas upbringing, lock and load kind of mentality.
Totally. Yeah, like very much the,
Right.
put on a brave face and,
Yeah,
power through it.
exactly. Yeah.
So, and it wasn't until she had this major career shift that she really started digging into it.
Right.
So she was on this management track at AT&T
Hmm.
and then made this huge leap to become a social worker,
Huge.
which is a pretty dramatic change.
It is. What do you think prompted that shift?
Well, she talks about this deep curiosity that she had about human connection.
Mm-hmm.
She really wanted to understand what makes us tick.
Yeah.
And what she found was that the people who were really living these wholehearted lives were the ones who were embracing vulnerability,
That's interesting.
right? They were the ones who weren't afraid
Right.
to show up authentically imperfections in all this.
And it sounds like that's what led her to this whole idea of vulnerability being the key to courage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So through her research on wholehearted living,
Mm-hmm.
she discovered that vulnerability was this common thread among people who were living these really courageous and connected lives.
Makes sense.
They were willing to be seen, they were willing to take risks,
Totally.
step outside their comfort zones,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in those moments of vulnerability that they experienced the greatest growth and connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like that saying, feel the fear and do it anyway. But I think a lot of us struggle with that.
Oh, absolutely. I know, I do.
Me too, for sure.
But it's true. We're often drawn to vulnerability in other people, but we're terrified of it in ourselves.
Yes.
And even Brown herself, she talks about this. She admits to grappling with this, especially when she gave her famous TEDx Houston talk.
Right?
She was petrified to get up on stage.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a really scary thing.
But what she did was she focused on her arena,
Yeah,
which is that idea of having this inner circle of support.
right. Those people you can really count on.
Exactly. And knowing that they've got your back no matter what.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because, on the flip side of that, you have shame,
Right.
which can be incredibly powerful and can really hold us back.
Oh, absolutely. And shame thrives on secrecy and silence.
Yeah.
It makes us feel alone and isolated in our struggles.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to talk about shame,
Right.
to bring it out into the light, to realize that we're not alone in our experiences.
And I think Brown does such a good job of modeling that vulnerability.
She does.
She shares that story in the book about accidentally sending this angry email
Oh, yeah.
and the shame spiral that she went into after that.
I remember that story. It was so raw and relatable.
Right. And, for someone who studies this stuff,
Right.
it's like you would think that she would have it all figured out.
Yeah, you would think.
But she's very honest and open about her own struggles.
She is, and I think that's what makes her work so powerful,
But-
because she's not coming from this place of perfection.
Right.
She's coming from a place of shared humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And that story about the email is a great example of how shame can trigger our fight, flight, or freeze response.
Oh, for sure.
That feeling of wanting to lash out or disappear or just shut down completely.
Yeah, you just want to crawl under a rock and hide.
Exactly. But Brown shows us that the antidote to shame is empathy and connection. So in that story, she talks about reaching out to her husband and a friend, and that helped her process those feelings and move through that shame spiral.
Yeah, it's like having those people in your life who can just hold space for you
Exactly.
and listen without judgment.
And remind you that you're not alone.
Yeah, and that you're loved even when you mess up.
Exactly. And it's not just about feeling better either.
Right.
There's actually research on shame resilience, like the work of James Penemaker, that shows that talking about our experiences,
Yep.
even just writing about them,
Interesting.
can have a positive impact on our physical and mental well-being.
Wow, so it's like vulnerability is good for our health.
It really is. Holding it all in can be detrimental.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, Brown also explores how the societal expectations, especially around gender, contribute to shame.
Yes, definitely.
She uses this metaphor of a box to describe the limitations placed on men's emotional expression.
Right. It's like they're only allowed to express certain emotions.
Exactly. Like, anger is okay,
Right.
But sadness or fear, those are seen as weaknesses.
Yeah, and it creates this double bind
It does.
where they're criticized for both expressing and suppressing their emotions.
Exactly. And so often they end up either exploding in anger or shutting down completely,
Yeah,
both of which hinder connection and intimacy.
for sure. And women face these unique pressures too,
Oh, absolutely.
especially around body image and this need to be perfect.
Right. It's like this constant pressure to fit into these unrealistic ideals.
Totally. And it creates so much anxiety.
It does. It creates this breeding ground for shame.
For sure. And, speaking of things that we use to protect ourselves from vulnerability,
Yeah.
there's perfectionism.
Oh, perfectionism, the ultimate shield.
Right. And Brown knows this one well,
She does.
both from her research and personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
She calls it fear in high heels.
I love that.
This constant striving for flawlessness that's driven by fear of shame and judgment.
It's a trap, though, isn't it?
It is, because perfection doesn't exist.
Ex-
It's this unattainable goal that just leads to feelings of inadequacy and, ironically, more shame.
Right. It's like chasing a mirage in the desert.
Totally.
Right.
So how do we break free from this perfectionistic trap?
Well, Brown suggests that we need to reframe perfectionism,
Okay.
not as a quest for excellence, but as a defense mechanism against vulnerability.
Interesting.
So instead of trying to be perfect,
Yeah.
we need to focus on being authentic, embracing our imperfections, and recognizing that our cracks are what make us unique and beautiful.
It's like that Japanese art of kintsugi,
Oh, I love kintsugi.
where they repair broken pottery with gold,
Right.
highlighting the cracks and imperfections as part of the object's history and beauty.
Exactly. It's about seeing our imperfections not as flaws, but as opportunities for growth and connection.
That's such a beautiful way to look at it.
It is.
But, sometimes instead of facing those imperfections,
Yeah.
we try to numb ourselves from the discomfort of vulnerability.
Right. And Brown's research shows that numbing can take many forms. Overworking, excessive screen time, substance use, even emotional withdrawal.
Right. It's like we're trying to create this buffer between ourselves and the world.
Exactly.
But in doing so, we miss out on the fullness of life, both the good and the bad.
We do. And it doesn't really work.
No.
Those feelings don't just disappear. They fester and grow stronger in the darkness.
Yeah, they just come back with a vengeance.
They do.
Yeah.
So we need to find healthier ways to cope with those uncomfortable emotions.
Absolutely. And that starts with, recognizing our numbing behaviors.
Right.
And understanding the underlying feelings that are driving them.
Exactly. It's about getting curious about what's really going on beneath the surface.
And then, developing alternative coping mechanisms.
Right.
Like practicing self-compassion, reaching out for support,
Yes.
engaging in activities that bring us joy and connection.
Exactly. It's about finding those things that nourish our souls.
And, another thing that Brown talks about is this idea of Viking or victim thinking,
Oh.
where we see the world in these extremes.
Right. Like either we're in control, dominating, never showing weakness,
Right.
or we're constantly being taken advantage of, playing the victim.
Yeah, and it's this binary thinking
It is.
that can be so limiting.
It really can.
It prevents us from seeing the nuances of situations
Right.
and from taking responsibility for our own actions.
Exactly. It keeps us stuck in a cycle of blame and resentment.
It's like we're wearing these blinders,
Yeah.
only able to see the world through these narrow lenses of domination or victimhood.
Right. And it prevents us from building genuine connections and collaborating effectively with others.
So we need to step out of those rigid roles
We do.
and embrace the messiness and uncertainty of life.
Embrace the mess.
Which brings us to this concept of minding the gap.
Okay, let's unpack that.
So what does minding the gap actually mean?
Well, it's about paying attention to the discrepancy
Okay.
between our aspirational values, the values that we say are important to us, and our practiced values, the values we actually live by.
So it's like recognizing where our actions don't align with our words.
Exactly.
I see.
And this gap is where disengagement and cynicism breed.
Oh, that makes sense.
We see it in families, organizations, even in society as a whole.
It's like that saying, do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. And it erodes trust and authenticity.
Sure.
So, for example, we might say we value honesty,
Yeah.
but then tell a little white lie to avoid conflict.
Right. Or preach open communication
All right.
while keeping secrets and sweeping problems under the rug.
Exactly. Or talk about gratitude and respect, but take our loved ones for granted and engage in gossip and negativity.
It's like this disconnect between what we say and what we do.
It is. And it's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the gap and striving to align our actions with our values.
And Brown's research is full of examples of this gap in action.
It is like that story of the principal who was advocating for an anti-gossip culture,
Uh,
but then got caught up in gossip herself.
Right. And it would have been so easy for her to just dismiss her son's concerns,
Absolutely.
or try to justify her actions.
Yeah.
But instead, she owned her mistake,
She did.
apologized,
Yeah.
and used it as a teaching moment.
Yeah, and that's what's so powerful about that story.
It is.
It shows that acknowledging our imperfections and modeling accountability
Mm-hmm.
is far more effective than simply preaching values
Right.
without embodying them.
So minding the gap is really about bridging that disconnect
Exactly.
between what we say and what we do.
And it's a crucial step towards living a more wholehearted life.
For sure. And, this idea of minding the gap
Yeah.
ties in nicely with another strategy that Brown discusses.
Which is engaged feedback.
Engaged feedback. Love it.
So this is about shifting from a critical, judgmental approach to a more supportive and collaborative one.
Right. It's about seeing feedback as an opportunity for growth and development
Yeah.
rather than as a personal attack.
Imagine sitting side by side with someone working together to address challenges and find solutions,
Right.
instead of facing off across a desk armed with criticism.
It's like creating a space where vulnerability can thrive,
Exactly.
where people feel safe to share their ideas and perspectives without fear of judgment or rejection.
And Brown shares this great example of a social work professor who chose to sit next to a struggling student
Oh, yeah.
during a difficult conversation instead of towering over her from behind a desk.
Right.
And it just created a more supportive and collaborative atmosphere.
It's a subtle but powerful shift
It is.
that can make a huge difference in how we give and receive feedback.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to vulnerability. Being open to feedback, even when it's uncomfortable,
Yeah.
requires a willingness to be seen to acknowledge our imperfections.
Right.
And to trust that we can learn and grow from our mistakes.
It's about embracing the idea that we're all works in progress.
Exactly.
And speaking of works in progress,
Yeah.
let's talk about raising children.
Okay.
Because Brown also emphasizes the importance of raising children with a strong sense of worthiness and the ability to embrace vulnerability.
Right.
But how do we do that?
Well, it starts with modeling those qualities ourselves.
So showing them that we value ourselves,
Yeah.
embrace our imperfections, and aren't afraid to be vulnerable.
Exactly. It's about creating a home environment where it's okay to make mistakes,
Yeah.
to express a full range of emotions, and to ask for help when we need it.
It's about creating that safe space for them to be themselves
Exactly.
without fear of judgment or rejection.
And that includes understanding the difference between shame and guilt.
Right. Shame is that feeling of being inherently bad or flawed, while guilt is about specific behaviors.
Right. So instead of saying, you're a bad girl for breaking that vase,
Yeah.
we might say, breaking things can be upsetting. Let's be more careful next time.
It's about addressing the action, not attacking the child's sense of self.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that shame can be especially damaging for children
Yeah?
because it triggers those feelings of unlovability, which
Yeah.
can feel life-threatening at a young age.
And it can have long-lasting effects.
It can.
Brown shares that story about a mother who apologized to her adult daughter
Oh, right.
for using shame-based parenting.
Powerful story.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in breaking the cycle of shame.
We do, and it starts with cultivating awareness of our own shame triggers
Right.
and working to respond to our children with empathy and understanding.
So modeling vulnerability, using guilt-focused language, and creating a safe and supportive environment. These are all essential for raising children who are comfortable with their own imperfections.
They are.
And who have the courage to embrace vulnerability.
Exactly. It's about equipping them with the tools they need to navigate the challenges of life
Right.
with resilience and authenticity.
And it all ties back to this idea of creating a world where vulnerability is celebrated, not shamed.
I love that.
But I think a lot of us struggle with that,
We do.
especially when it comes to differences of opinion or parenting styles.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in debates and judgment.
Totally.
Yeah.
Especially in today's polarized climate.
It's tough to navigate those differences.
It is.
Without resorting to shame tactics.
Right.
Or feeling like our own values are being attacked.
So how do we do that? How do we have those difficult conversations?
Well, Brown cautions against that kind of judgment and encourages respectful dialogue and empathy instead.
Okay.
She emphasizes that there's no one right way to parent.
Right.
And that different families may make different choices based on their unique values and circumstances.
And she even uses examples from her own parenting journey,
She does.
like allowing her daughter to read The Hunger Games.
Right.
and respecting her son's decision to opt out of a swim race.
Yeah,
These stories highlight the challenges and rewards of honoring individual choices,
they do.
even when they make us uncomfortable.
Even when they...
It's about finding that balance between setting boundaries
Right.
and respecting individual differences,
Right.
both within our families and in society as a whole.
It's about recognizing that we don't have to agree on everything.
Right.
To coexist peacefully and respectfully.
And it's about remembering that we all have the same basic needs
Yeah,
for connection, belonging, and love.
we do.
Even when we disagree, we can still approach each other with empathy and understanding.
Absolutely.
You know, this reminds me of another story that Brown shares.
Which one?
The one about her daughter feeling like the other during recess soccer.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It so perfectly captures that universal desire to belong, to be chosen, to feel like we matter.
It's heartbreaking to think about her daughter feeling excluded and invisible.
It is, but what's remarkable is how Brown used that experience as a teaching moment.
Yeah.
You know, she didn't dismiss her daughter's feelings or try to minimize them.
Right.
Instead, she acknowledged the pain of feeling like the other and connected with her daughter on a deeper level
Right.
by sharing her own experiences.
That kind of vulnerability and empathy is so powerful.
It is.
It shows children that they're not alone in their struggles.
Yeah.
And that even adults experience those same feelings of hurt and exclusion.
It normalizes those experiences and creates a space for genuine connection.
Right.
And it also models the importance of recognizing and honoring our own feelings,
Exactly.
even when they're uncomfortable.
Even when they are.
So these stories about Brown's children really emphasize the power of vulnerability in parenting.
They do.
But what about applying these principles to our own lives?
Right. How do we take all of this and make it practical?
Exactly. You know, because we've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
from understanding shame and perfectionism
Mm-hmm.
to recognizing the power of vulnerability in our relationships
Yeah.
and even in our leadership.
Right. So where do we go from here?
Welcome back to our deep dive into Brené Brown's Daring Greatly.
It's a good one.
We've uncovered some incredible insights about vulnerability and its role in living a more wholehearted life.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about the myth of perfectionism,
Right.
the dangers of numbing, the power of shame resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think it's time to get a little bit more practical.
Yes. Let's talk about how to actually bring these insights into our daily lives.
Exactly.
So Brown provides this framework for understanding the key elements of wholehearted living.
Okay.
And it all starts with a sense of worthiness.
Worthiness.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty fundamental.
It is. And Brown's research shows that people who live wholeheartedly, those who experience deep connection and belonging,
Mm-hmm.
they believe they are worthy of love and belonging just as they are.
Okay, so it's not about earning worthiness
No.
through achievements or accolades.
Exactly. It's about recognizing our inherent value as human beings.
I see.
And this is where parenting comes in.
Okay.
Brown believes that one of the most important things we can do for our children is to model this belief in our own lives.
So showing them that we value ourselves, we embrace our imperfections.
Yeah.
We're not afraid to be vulnerable.
Exactly. This authenticity helps children develop a strong sense of self-worth
Okay.
and the courage to be themselves.
So it's about creating an environment where vulnerability is seen as a strength, not a weakness.
Yes, and this starts with understanding the difference between shame and guilt.
Oh yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier,
We did.
but I think it's worth revisiting.
It is. So shame is that feeling of being inherently bad or flawed,
Right.
while guilt is about specific behaviors.
Okay.
So Brown stresses the importance of using guilt-focused language with children,
Mm.
addressing their actions rather than attacking their sense of self.
So instead of saying you're a bad girl for breaking that vest,
Right.
we might say breaking things can be like, let's be more careful next time.
Exactly. It's about helping them understand that they are not bad kids even when they make bad choices.
Right.
And it's just as important to model this in our own lives. You know, when we mess up, we need to own our mistakes, apologize, and make amends.
Yeah. Lead by example.
Right. This shows our children that it's okay to be imperfect and that we can learn and grow from our mistakes.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like this ties into the idea of normalizing difficult emotions and experiences.
Absolutely.
You know, it's okay to feel sad, angry, or frustrated.
It is. Children need to see us expressing those emotions in a healthy way.
Okay.
We need to create a space where they feel safe to share their feelings without judgment or dismissal.
So it's about creating this open and honest environment not
Yeah.
just in our homes, but in all of our relationships.
Precisely, this kind of openness is essential for building strong, healthy connections.
Okay.
And it's a key component of daring greatly, which Brown talks a lot about in the book.
So let's talk about daring greatly.
Okay.
What does it actually mean?
So it can be a little intimidating,
Yeah, it sounds a bit scary.
but it's also incredibly empowering.
Ugh.
Daring greatly is about stepping into the arena, as Brown puts it, and being vulnerable even when it feels scary.
So having the courage to show up authentically, to put ourselves out there,
Yeah.
and to risk rejection or criticism.
Exactly, but it's not about being reckless.
Right. It's not about just throwing caution to the wind.
No, it's about being mindful and intentional with our vulnerability.
Okay.
It's about choosing to be vulnerable in situations where it can lead to deeper connection and growth.
So choosing our battles, so to speak.
Yes, and choosing our audience.
Okay.
Brown talks about floodlight vulnerability versus flashlight vulnerability.
Floodlight, flashlight. I like that analogy.
Yeah, so floodlight vulnerability is like standing on a stage and sharing our deepest, most personal experiences with a large audience.
Okay.
Flashlight vulnerability is more selective.
Okay.
It's about sharing those vulnerabilities with a few trusted individuals in a safe and controlled environment.
So being mindful of who we share our vulnerabilities with and how much we reveal.
Exactly. It's about trusting our gut instincts and setting boundaries around our vulnerability. We don't have to share everything with everyone.
That's so important. We get to choose who we let into that inner circle.
We do, but it's not just about protecting ourselves, is it?
No.
It's also about recognizing that vulnerability is a two-way street.
Oh, that's a good point.
To truly dare greatly, we need to be willing to both give and receive vulnerability.
Yeah.
We need to be open to hearing other people's stories, to holding space for their pain and struggles, and to responding with empathy and compassion.
So it's about creating a space where we can all be our true selves, imperfections and all.
Exactly, without fear of judgment or rejection.
And that's the beauty of daring greatly.
It is.
When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we open up the possibility for deep connection, profound joy, and a life that is truly meaningful.
Yeah, it sounds like it's worth the risk.
It does, but what about those times when vulnerability feels too overwhelming or too scary?
Well, Brown acknowledges that vulnerability can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah, it can be really tough.
So she offers some strategies for navigating those difficult emotions.
And one of her key recommendations is to practice self-compassion.
Self-compassion, something we can all use a little more of.
Absolutely. It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a dear friend.
Right, like giving ourselves a break, cutting ourselves some slack.
Exactly. And it's a powerful antidote to shame and self-criticism.
So instead of beating ourselves up when we mess up, we can try to talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a friend who's going through a tough time.
Right. And that includes recognizing and challenging the negative self-talk that often accompanies shame and vulnerability.
Oh yeah, that inner critic that tells us we're not good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough.
Exactly. Brown suggests asking ourselves, would I say this to a friend?
Interesting.
And if the answer is no,
Yeah.
then it's time to reframe that negative self-talk
Okay.
and replace it with more compassionate and supportive messages.
So being our own best friend, our own cheerleader.
Exactly. Another important strategy is to reach out for support from trusted individuals.
You know, shame thrives on secrecy and isolation. When we share our struggles with others, we break down those walls of shame and create space for healing and connection.
It's like letting the light and shame can't survive in the light of shared experience and empathy.
Right. Brown encourages us to cultivate a circle of stretch mark friends.
Stretch mark friends. I love that term.
Yeah, these are the people who love us for our strengths and struggles, who've seen us at our best and worst, and who accept us unconditionally.
The people who've been through it all with us.
Yeah, they're the ones who remind us that we're not alone, that we're worthy of love and belonging just as we are.
They're like our own personal cheerleading squad.
Exactly. And they're essential for our journey toward wholehearted living.
So self-compassion, challenging negative self-talk, and building strong support systems, these all seem like crucial components of embracing vulnerability.
They are.
But what about applying these principles to leadership?
Oh, great question.
Does vulnerability have a place in the workplace?
Absolutely. In fact, Brown argues that vulnerability is a key ingredient for effective leadership.
Interesting.
Leaders who are willing to be vulnerable, to admit when they don't have all the answers, to own their mistakes, and to ask for help,
Yeah.
they create a culture of trust and authenticity.
It's about leading with your heart, Not just your head.
Exactly. And it's not about being weak or indecisive.
Right.
It's about being human, about recognizing that we're all in this together,
Hmm.
and about creating a space where everyone feels safe to be themselves, to contribute their best work, and to dare greatly.
I love that. So it's like when we see our leaders being vulnerable, it gives us permission to do the same.
Exactly. It creates a more open and collaborative environment.
For sure. And Brown even provides this helpful framework for understanding the key elements of daring leadership.
She does.
She calls it the BRAVING acronym.
Love a good acronym.
Me too. What does BRAVING stand for?
Okay, so B is for boundaries.
Okay.
Setting clear boundaries around our time, energy, and emotional capacity.
Boundaries are essential. What about R?
R is for reliability, doing what we say we'll do consistently and dependably.
Okay, so being trustworthy and following through on our commitments.
Exactly.
That's important for building trust.
It is.
What about A?
A is for accountability, owning our mistakes, apologizing and making amends.
Taking responsibility for our actions even when it's difficult.
Yeah,
That takes courage.
it does.
Okay, V.
V is for vault, keeping confidences and respecting others' privacy.
So being discreet and honoring the trust that others place in us.
Exactly. It's for
Wow.
integrity, choosing courage over comfort, choosing what's right over what's easy.
Standing up for what we believe in, even when it's unpopular.
Yes, integrity in action.
I like it. Okay.
N is for non-judgment, practicing non-judgment of ourselves and others.
So letting go of criticism and embracing acceptance.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is.
But so important for creating a compassionate and supportive environment.
Okay.
G is for generosity, extending the most generous interpretation possible to the intentions, words, and actions of others.
So giving people the benefit of the doubt, assuming good intentions.
Exactly.
That's a powerful practice.
It is.
So this BRAVING acronym is a great roadmap for cultivating the kind of vulnerability that leads to effective leadership.
I love that.
It's about building trust, fostering connection, and creating a space where everyone feels safe to be themselves, to contribute their best work, and to dare greatly.
It's a powerful vision.
It is, and it's something we can all aspire to,
Yeah,
both in our personal and professional lives.
absolutely.
But, vulnerability isn't just about leadership, is it?
No, it's not.
It also plays a vital role in creativity and innovation.
It does. Brown argues that vulnerability is essential for creativity
Okay.
because it allows us to step outside of our comfort zones, to experiment, and to take risks. When we're afraid to be vulnerable, we tend to stick to what we know, to play it safe, and to avoid putting ourselves out there.
Right, we don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly, and this stifles creativity and innovation.
It's like we're trapped in a creative rut, afraid to color outside the lines.
Right, so Brown encourages us to embrace the discomfort of vulnerability,
Oh,
to see it as an opportunity for growth and discovery.
I like that.
And she reminds us that creativity is not about perfection, it's about process.
Careful.
It's about showing up, being willing to make mistakes, and learning from our failures.
So embracing the messy, imperfect nature of the creative process.
Exactly. It's about trusting our instincts, embracing our unique voices, and having the courage to share our creations with the world, even when we're not sure what the response will be.
Yeah, that takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there to risk rejection or criticism.
It does, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
Yeah.
When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we open ourselves up to the possibility of creating something truly unique and meaningful.
It's like we're embracing the unknown and trusting that something beautiful can emerge from that vulnerability.
It's a powerful reminder that vulnerability is not just about personal growth and connection. It's about creating a better world.
So vulnerability is not just about our personal lives. It's also about how we show up in the world, how we lead, how we create, how we connect with others.
Exactly. Brown's work challenges us to rethink our relationship with vulnerability,
Okay.
to see it not as a weakness, but as a strength, not as something to be avoided, but as something to be embraced.
It's a call to action, an invitation to dare greatly, to show up authentically, and to live a life that is full of meaning, connection, and purpose.
And a reminder that we're all in this together.
Yes.
We're all human, we all struggle, we all need each other.
And when we can connect on that level, when we can be vulnerable with each other, we create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and loved.
That's a beautiful vision.
It is, and it all starts with having the courage to be vulnerable.
To dare greatly, as Brown says, and to embrace the messy, imperfect, beautiful journey of life.
I love that. But let's pause for a moment
Okay.
and revisit one of the key themes that has emerged from our discussion,
Which is,
the importance of minding the gap.
yes, I think this concept is so important. It's about recognizing that discrepancy between the values we aspire to and the values we actually practice.
Right, and that gap is where disengagement and cynicism breed.
It does. It can show up in our families, our workplaces, even in society as a whole.
Yeah, is that disconnect between what we say and what we do.
And it can be so damaging.
It can.
It erodes trust and undermines our efforts to create a more just and equitable world.
So think about it.
Okay.
We might say we value honesty and integrity,
Right.
but then rationalize dishonesty to protect ourselves or to get ahead.
Or we preach open communication while keeping secrets and hiding problems.
Yeah, or we talk about gratitude and respect, but take our loved ones for granted and engage in gossip and negativity.
Those inconsistencies create a culture of hypocrisy
Right.
where our words and actions don't align.
And that misalignment leads to disengagement, cynicism, and a lack of trust.
It does, and Brown's research is full of examples of this gap in action.
Yeah, like parents who preach honesty but then drive away from a store without paying for something.
Right. Or organizations that tout values of collaboration and innovation, but then punish employees for taking risks and making mistakes.
It's a pervasive problem.
It is. So how do we actually mind the gap?
That's the question, right?
It starts with awareness.
Okay.
We have to be honest with ourselves about the ways in which our actions might not be aligning with our values.
Right.
We need to pay attention to those discrepancies between what we say and what we do.
It's like holding up a mirror to ourselves and really taking a good look.
Exactly. And then we need to be willing to own our mistakes and apologize and make amends when we fall short.
So taking responsibility for our actions and making things right.
And it's about modeling accountability for others.
Okay.
You know, when we see someone engaging in behaviors that contradict our shared values,
Yeah.
we need to speak up even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it can be challenging to call people out,
It can.
but it's essential for creating a culture of integrity and authenticity.
It's about holding ourselves and others accountable for living in alignment with the values we say are important to us, and recognizing that we're all works in progress,
Right.
learning and growing along the way. You know, minding the gap is a continuous process.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. But it's a journey worth taking because when we can close that gap
Yeah.
between our aspirational values and our practiced values, we create a more authentic, trustworthy, and fulfilling life for ourselves and those around us.
I love that.
It's about living a life of integrity where our words and actions are aligned and where we can show up in the world as our true selves.
You know, that reminds me of the story about Brené Brown's experience during her TEDx Houston talk.
Oh, yeah.
You know, she was terrified to be vulnerable in front of such a large audience.
I can only imagine.
But she talks about focusing on her arena, those people in her life who love and support her unconditionally.
Right.
It was their support that gave her the courage to step onto that stage and share her story.
It's a great example of how important it is to surround ourselves with people who believe in us, who see our worth, and who love us for who we are.
Yeah, those people remind us that we're not alone, that we're worthy of love and belonging just as we are.
Exactly. And they give us the courage to be vulnerable, to dare greatly, and to step into the arena of life, even when it feels scary.
So as we continue our deep dive into daring greatly, I encourage you to think about your own arena.
Yeah.
Who are those people in your life who support you unconditionally? Who are the ones you can be your true self with?
Right.
Who are the people who give you the courage to be vulnerable?
Good question.
And think about those areas in your life where you might be holding back, where you might be afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
What would it look like to dare greatly in those areas?
Right. What would it take to step into the arena and show up authentically?
These are important questions to consider as we continue our exploration of vulnerability.
They are.
And its power to transform our lives.
Yeah.
Join us for part 3 of our deep dives, where we'll explore even more strategies for embracing vulnerability and living a more courageous and connected life. And welcome back to our final deep dive into Brené Brown's Daring Greatly.
Such a good book.
It really is. And, you know, we've covered so much ground in these last couple parts.
Yeah, I know, right? We've been
Exploring everything from shame and perfectionism to the transformative power of vulnerability in our relationships, in our leadership, even in our creativity.
Totally. And, you know, I think one of the big things that's come up again and again is this idea that vulnerability is not a destination. It's a practice.
It's a journey, right?
It's something we cultivate over time through these small acts of courage and a willingness to just show up authentically.
You know, it's kind of like a muscle we need to strengthen.
It is. Like, think about going to the gym.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect to bench press 200 pounds
Oh, no.
on your first day.
Not at all.
So we need to exercise that vulnerability muscle little by little.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, I think it's about identifying those areas in our lives where we're holding back,
Okay.
where we're playing it safe or hiding behind masks.
So asking ourselves, like, where am I not being fully myself?
Yeah, exactly.
Where am I afraid to let people see the real me?
Right, and then we can start to experiment with these small acts of vulnerability.
What do you mean?
So it could be something as simple as, sharing a personal story with a trusted friend or colleague.
Okay.
Or maybe it's asking for help when we need it, even if it makes us feel a bit exposed.
Or admitting when we've made a mistake instead of trying to cover it up or blame someone else.
Exactly. It's about pushing ourselves just beyond that comfort zone step by step.
Little by little.
Right? And remember, we don't have to do this alone.
We've got our people.
We do. We've got our people.
Those people who love and accept us unconditionally.
Exactly. Those are the folks who make up our arena.
Our arena.
That inner circle of trust and support.
Okay.
And they're the ones that we can be vulnerable with, knowing that we won't be judged or rejected.
Yeah. It's like having a safety net
Yes.
when we're learning to walk a tightrope.
I love that analogy.
We know someone's there to catch us if we fall.
Exactly. And just as important as having that external support system is practicing self-compassion.
Oh, yes. Can't forget about being kind to ourselves.
So true, especially when we make mistakes or stumble along the way.
Yeah.
So self-compassion is about recognizing that we're human, that we're all imperfect, and that we're all worthy of love and acceptance, even when we're not at our best.
Even when we're not perfect.
Exactly. It's about silencing that inner critic and replacing those negative thoughts with more compassionate and supportive messages.
So treating ourselves the way we would treat a good friend who's going through a tough time.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we're often much harder on ourselves
Way harder.
than we would ever be on a friend.
Totally.
So embracing vulnerability isn't about becoming a pushover
No.
or letting people walk all over us.
It's not about being weak or naive.
Right. It's about having the courage to be authentic, to set boundaries, and to honor our own needs and values.
Exactly. It's about finding that delicate balance between openness and self-protection.
Okay, I like that.
And it's about remembering that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength.
It takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, to
Yeah.
let ourselves be seen, warts and all.
It does, and it's in those moments of vulnerability that we open ourselves up to the possibility of deep connection, profound joy, and a life that is truly meaningful.
You know, it's like we're saying to the world, this is me,
Yeah.
take it or leave it.
And you know what? The people who matter, the people who are meant to be in our lives, they will embrace us for who we are, imperfections and all.
That's such a great reminder.
It is. Before we wrap up, I
Sure.
want to touch on something that really resonated with me from Brown's book.
Okay.
She talks about the stretch mark friends in our
The
lives.
stretch mark friends.
Yeah, these are the people whose connection with us has been stretched and pulled so much that it's become part of who we are.
Okay, the ones who've seen us at our best and worst.
Yes.
And love us unconditionally.
Exactly. They're the ones that have weathered the storms.
Right.
And come out stronger on the other side.
And Brown describes it so beautifully when she says,
Yeah.
the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what we share with someone else when we're uncool.
Oh my gosh, that's good.
Right.
It speaks to the depth and authenticity of those relationships where we can be our true, unfiltered selves.
Yeah, stretch marks and all.
Stretch marks and all.
I love that.
It's a reminder that vulnerability is the key to unlocking those deep, meaningful connections.
For sure.
It's the foundation for a life that is rich, fulfilling, and truly wholehearted.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question.
Okay.
Who are those stretch mark friends in your life?
Yeah, who are they?
How can you nurture those relationships and make them even stronger?
Good question.
And how can you bring more vulnerability into your everyday interactions, even in small ways?
Little by little.
Remember, vulnerability is not a weakness.
It's not.
It's the birthplace of courage, creativity, and connection.
So true.
So dare greatly embrace your imperfections and step into the arena of life with an open and courageous heart.
Beautiful.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into vulnerability, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.